Welcome, everyone. Thanks for picking this up and taking some time to work on foundation and perspective and figure. So, um, putting together this video because it's probably one of the more common questions that I get. Perspective, dealing with figures in terms of their construction and how that's related to a foundational understanding of drawing. Right, so I'd say the basic goal for me is bring a little bit more attention or discussion to the idea of foundation skills and then how that applies to figure construction, let's say. Because maybe we're all interested in drawing figures, but it's not obvious to me, or I think most people starting out, how you're supposed to put together a basic constructed or perspective figure. When I was in school, my teachers would say, well, just draw the head as a box. I'd be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. That doesn't make any sense to me that the head is a box or how to draw a box or how to even see that. So I think the basic, dilemma here is if I were to kind of sum it up in terms of one problem, is that, what I do in all of the anatomy and figure drawing classes that I run or that I teach is I always put an emphasis on that we have essentially three types of lines, and that from these you can generate a number of different configurations, like a straight followed by a curve followed by a straight, et cetera, et cetera. And then you have let's say your basic forms. So like your cylinder, you have your ball or ellipse, you have your box. And I think what is easy to have happen early on is that we just overlook these as if they're like not important, or they're like exercises that we're maybe asked to do, and they're not really all that sexy. They don't look like a figure or a car or anything like that. Or and I think you probably all can relate to that in some sense, because it's how I feel, right? These aren't like it's not the most compelling subject to study, like still life, basic forms, these kinds of things. But I think it could just be a frame shift, or a way to frame it, in that kind of have I come to appreciate it more and more recently, having teach or taught more foundation sketching classes, is that this is your entire vocabulary for everything. So I think if we can shift this one frame or one way of understanding what it is that we're doing when we sit down to make a drawing or a study, we're not drawing a thing, right? Like, and that's something I got caught up in a lot when I was younger, was I wanted to draw a figure. I wanted to draw the figure that I saw in a comic book, by Todd McFarlane, or fill in the blank, whatever it was for you. That's weird. That's a weird headspace, because you're not drawing a figure. You're not making a figure. You're making a drawing. And so the illusion or the appearance of the thing you're drawing, be it a car or a comic or a figure, or in this case, a figure broken down into perspectives, it's about the drawing. And more than that, more specifically, it's about the vocabulary of drawing. Right? Just like if you were writing a letter or typing a letter, you have to have a basic understanding of grammar, sentence structure. Like, that's what makes the thought. It's not the letters themselves, right? It's their configuration and combination, how fluent you are with them, and the more fluent you get, the more poetic it is, right? So if I'm ever doing a figure, I'm just working on these things. And that really does extend even into the anatomy. Anything that I'm drawing, it always is these. And so the degree to which I understand or don't understand these impacts everything that is made from them. So when we kind of get into the idea of figure construction, or just, let's just say, a figure drawing process period, what I always try to do in terms of my process and how I teach and how I share with people and students is it's numbered, right? My process is always like, here's my steps. And sometimes this makes people nuts, right? Because, I think especially now, more and more we want it to be instant. And we see all these brilliant people on Instagram, that just put a line down and it's the thing, and there's no build up, or it doesn't look like there's any learning. It's just immediate in terms of some people are drawing with both hands at the same time, and then different views and all kinds of things just coming out of their heads, right? So it's not that just happens. So the real road, I think, to getting to that place, if that's something that you actually desire, is that you have to slow things way down and understand all the different component parts that they're putting to use. Right, in that all they're doing is just, it's all of the steps, but they're sped up and probably condensed or collapsed into one because they've gone through a more patient understanding of form and buildup. So when I'm teaching people a process, the reason I have every kind of idea on its own step is because they're all linked to one vocabulary or one formal competency. So gesture, if you watch any of my videos, to do a gesture, it's just about asymmetry. That's it. I put a lot of talking about what it can be and what it's related to historically, but it's just about understanding asymmetry. Can you make the eye move? And then when we stack shapes on top, tilts are about angling things to produce a lean. So that's using a straight and orienting things on a directional axis. That's it. The second part of that, shapes, is just about slowing down and making sure you're drawing accurate eggs that represent rib cages and pelvises. Connections is actually, we're going to spend a lot of our time talking today. And I think this is the most important step to start to get in touch with what I'm talking about over here. But when we do connections, it's still connected to two curves. And then those curves do one of two things. They'll wrap or overlap, which I'll just call a T. Landmarks, there is the kind of the more conceptual problem of drawing an actual skeleton, and that's something that we could do or we'll do together. But landmarks, in terms of their visualization in the fundamental drawing process or sequence, is about observing the degree to which the figure at the core is rotating. And then 5 is about what is your 3D perspective. So this would be coming and using boxes and cylinders. So that's why I use an approach like this, is because I can always direct people back to the basic skill mechanic that they need to work on. And that's the easiest way to get better, is just being able to kind of strip it back to what the competency is that needs to be developed and then building it up from there. So the way that I plan for this kind of basic video to be organized is that you get a bit of an introduction here. I'm telling you kind of the big overarching theme is trying to build more of that appreciation for the foundational components or skills when it comes time to construct our figures. And as far as, I'll give you a couple, I think to start out, a couple basic skill practices that you can do. So what are a couple, like practices or exercises that you could do to really pinpoint the use of form and how they're combined to show a more realistic feeling figure? And so those are going to be, what we'll talk about there will be form intersections. I think that's a really fun, if you can get there, if you can let go of like the needing it to be right and correct all the time. It's just a good opportunity to zone out, play with form, think about how you combine and build. You could even add in there, let's say form modifications or subtractions is also a really useful. So modification or subtraction we can address. Oops. And then I would say, yeah, I think that those are probably the most interesting or most important to me. So we'll be looking at basic skill exercises, right, to start out, because I want to ground us in that understanding of form. From that, what we'll do is kind of carry it over into the skeleton. So I'll be looking at the skeleton Because now, once we have an understanding of the important forms that we're going to be using in vocabulary sense, we want to know what we're aiming it at. So we'll look at the proportions. And it's not going to be a lecture where we get into the anatomical rigors of everything and what it all means, but I'll point out to you the basic proportions of the skeleton and then the key designs and shapes so that you have an understanding of what you should be or could be looking for when you're building your figures according to that process. Once we have this, 3, I'll introduce you to this process and do some examples so that you can see how this can be used to kind of full circle bring these vocabularies and their basic perspective properties to a thinking of the figure. And that's where we'll kind of end. I'll try to do a number of different demonstrations so that you get a sense of what is it like to draw the figure from the back or the side or the front and so on and so forth. So that's my plan. Let's go ahead and get started. Let's jump into thinking about the basic skills and then go from there.